it's not just the biologists. It's not just the feminists. It's the historians too. The historians also showed up in fucking huge numbers. Again, like hundreds and hundreds of people. That's incredible. How many have we got on this one? Nearly 1,000. Well, okay, 700. Oh no, wait, 7/10 of the way to 1,000. Of historians. Again, experts in history. Like, as these these end up being like softer sciences. Biology is like a hard science because you can measure things, like directly, empirically. I don't know. You can measure things in history and you can measure things in feminism, but people get all like, oh, it's just soft sciences. We're getting a range of sciences here, and they're all pointing in a similar direction, which is a good sign that they are more likely to be correct. If like the study of history and the study of biology were like vehemently opposed in their view of how the world works, you might be a little bit like, sounds a bit weird actually. But I think this is good. I think this is great to hear. And if you're a history person, you're going to be hype over this. So, dear members of Parliament, as historians, we write to you today to express our alarm and opposition to the attacks on the LGBT community emanating from the current government. Years of hostility escalating sharply in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling ominously recall the darkest moments of oppression of queer and trans people in the UK. To avoid repeating mistakes that led to widespread discrimination and violence in the past, you must act to stop these attacks now. The history of state oppression of queer people in the UK is, unfortunately, a long one. From centuries of criminalisation of sex between men, through NHS-sanctioned conversion therapy practiced against queer, trans and gender non-conforming people, and the continued practices of medically unnecessary interventions on infants born with variations of sex characteristics, to the concept of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship in the infamous Section 28 of the 1988 Local Government Act, which was an amendment to a bill that was going through. Anyway, LGBT people have seldom enjoyed unharassed existence in the UK. God, so grim. The state of it. Specifically, trans people's rights and recognition has proved particularly irksome for the British... Irksome's a good word. For the British legal and political establishment. Being trans was reclassified from a physical condition to a mental illness in 1969, resulting in trans people's substantive civil liberties being removed in 1970 by Corbett v. Corbett. That legal decision, which equated biological constitution at birth with true sex, was exposed in 2001 as a circular argument supported by no reasoning, evidence, or principle or policy save that of trans exclusion. In 2002, the UK government acknowledged that formally that being trans is not a mental illness, effectively reinstating its medical identity as a naturally occurring physical variation. Meanwhile, debates during committee stages of the Sex Discrimination Act in 1975 showed the government's intention had been to ensure that trans people were protected from discrimination under whatever sex they have legally changed to. This intention was achieved finally by the Gender Recognition Act. Now, however, that progress has been rolled back by a legal decision which is unsupported and factitious. God, sorry, I'm just one of those idiot streamers who can't read words. As that which disenfranchised trans people in 1970. Mate, I'm going to look at it. I'm suspicious that I'm reading this word wrong. Okay. That's just a word I don't know. I'm just stupid. Sorry, guys. We need the literature people to come out and sign a letter in favour of trans rights and use words like this. Anyway. Now, however, that progress has been rolled back by a legal decision which is as unsupported and factitious as which disenfranchised trans people in 1970. The recently published interim update on single-sex bases from the EHRC represents an unprecedented attack on the freedom and safety of the LGBT people in the UK. Never has the government agency sought to effectively ban an entire class of people from using public toilets and changing rooms. Never has the UK government agency arrogated the power to define who can and cannot be members of gay and lesbian groups and sought to require those organisations to exclude a specific class of people as a matter of course. These rules replicate and in many ways surpass the worst excesses of state discrimination against gender and sexual minorities in decades past. The EHRC's actions are only the latest in a string of hostile actions taken by the government against trans people, non-binary and intersex people. These actions have chilling historical precedents. Recent changes to schools' guidance erased and demeaned the existence of trans people in ways unmistakably redolent. Man, whoever wrote this has got a fucking PhD in words, innit? Redolent. I've never even heard the word redolent before. My goodness. I'm Googling it. I'm sure it's... Oh, you can work out what it means in the context. Strongly reminiscent of... This is why historians should be banned. Not because it's a soft science or whatever. Because they're flipping using long words. Really read this in a book, mate. Disgusting. Of Section 28. Exclusions of trans people from meaningful input to reforms of trans healthcare during and in the wake of the widely criticised Cass Review record the shameful exercises of gatekeeping and promotion of cures for homosexuality in the 50s. Again, this is just like... It's great to read this from experts in history when it is just the stuff that I have been saying. And I'm not saying, I was right all along. I'm actually the real expert. The information that I personally have picked up isn't much different to what you'll find any of the other mainstream trans rights activists saying. And the reason we're all saying it is because we all learn from each other. And when someone says something, they'll be like, oh, here's a thing. And you're like, oh, is that true? And you look it up. And it's not true and you never repeat it, or it is true and they're like, oh, it's the thing I've learned. And then it stops being the thing you say. And then 5 years later you're saying it and someone's like, what's the evidence for that? And you're like, I need to go and find the paper because I can't remember because I learned this 5 years ago and I don't have the information off the top of my head. And then you read something written by experts with a load of sources in, and they're saying the same things and you're like, great, I wasn't crazy. The ignoring of trans voices and lived experience by both the Supreme Court and the EHRC reflect the same pattern, with further restrictions of trans people's access to healthcare now being threatened. Meanwhile, updated regulations on prison accommodation, sports participation, and statistical data collection have all targeted trans people's right to exist as trans people in ways that echo the ugliest episodes of sectarian, racial, and sexual discrimination against other minority groups in this country's history. Like, it just makes you feel more sane hearing people say this. Like, you're not going mad. Actually, things are bad. And it is comparable to other things. That all this has transpired under the auspices of Labour government, one that apparently prides itself in commitment to human rights and equality, is outrageous. The party that passed the Equality Act now threatens to undermine its very purpose on the basis of the Supreme Court's scientifically and historically illiterate definition of biological sex. And the EHRC's egregious overreach of authority. The spurious claim, man, this masterpiece, this letter, the spurious claim that these attacks on trans people are justified in the name of protecting women flies in the face of generations of feminist activism and historical scholarship. Marginalizing and demonizing trans people does nothing to protect women. Indeed, history shows gender non-conforming cisgender women who do not conform to stereotypes of femininity, butch lesbians and intersex women of colour, are the earliest and easiest targets during periods of rigidly enforced gender norms. Historians seldom speak in absolutes. This government's disregard for trans people's safety, dignity and civil rights tempts us to make an exception. This is the best letter so far. No government orchestrates persecution against a minority group, as this government aims to, will be looked on kindly by history. The violence and discrimination visited on trans people by the proposed EHRC guidance, alongside the other policies already enforced, will indelibly stain those who enable it, just as the legacy of Section 28 did. Thankfully, it's not too late. We implore you to intervene now, to speak out in public support of trans rights, and to ask questions in Parliament, interrogating the EHSC, and refuse to ratify their dubious proposals, and meet with trans community organisations that have solved been ignored by those in power. The mistakes of the past need not be repeated. Sincerely, 700 fucking historians with way too big vocabulary. I will be providing links. Amazing. But it's not just the biologists. It's not just the feminists. It's not just the historians. Guess who's next? You're not going to get it. The geographers! I gotta admit that I was ignorant and stupid when I read this, and I was like, geography? Just colouring in maps, innit? Geography isn't just the study of land formations. It's also the study of society and societies, how they shape their surroundings and how the surroundings shape them. And they study the history of those things too. And it is a separate field. I'm not an expert in geography. I'm probably butchering it. This letter is a lot longer. I've decided I'm not going to read this out because I've done enough reading. But this, again, is signed by absolutely hundreds of people, lecturers, doctors, professors, experts, hundreds of them. Over 500 geographers. That is all I have for you today. But there is 4 fields that are, no offense to geographers, at least 3 of them constantly cited by the anti-trans movement as reason to deny trans people rights. They will say, we just care about biology. We just want to defend women. We just don't, we historically, we are just another human rights movement like all the others in history. And to have, like, a huge chunk of each of those professions and experts and lecturers and stuff come out and be like, actually, no, all of the things we know about, everything we're an expert in, supports the trans rights position. And I think that I personally am super hyped about all of this, seeing people write it. I'm so glad that a bunch of cis people are finally doing something. I'm not going to berate them and be like, oh, finally, the geographers finally woke up. Like, it's just good to see. And it takes big things to get people moving. But some of these people will just sign a letter and they'll never do anything else again. But lots of them won't. Lots of them will be like alive because of this court decision and be like, wow, okay, this is one of the major issues of our time. I'm going to do something about it. Maybe they'll write an essay about it. Maybe they'll talk to their friends about it. Maybe they'll campaign to their local MP about it. They'll offer their expertise at the next conference they go to. They'll talk about it. And all this kind of stuff really does make a difference. And if you are in a science or expertise that hasn't been covered yet, that you think is relevant, maybe you could start a letter. Maybe you could be like, I actually don't fully like all of this letter, but I still want to write a letter similar. Do your own one. Maybe you'll get even more signatures. I just think this kind of stuff is good. It is important. And if we had a decent media, the media would be covering this as a huge deal because they were covering it. I remember when they had a letter that was like 12 trans people speak out against the Gender Recognition Act. And it was like front page in every single newspaper for like 3 weeks in a row or something. It was like major things. And then I tried to work out who these 12 trans people were. And I talked to like 4 or 5 of them. One of them was Debbie Hayton, obviously. Idiot. But 3 of the ones that I talked to who signed that letter, 3 of them out of the 12 changed their minds and said that they wouldn't sign it. Like, it just weeks afterwards, and they were like, oh, we didn't realise how bad all this was. We didn't expect it to be like this, because they were stupid to sign it in the first place. But they had 12, and it was like national news. None of this is probably going to be national news, but you can talk about it. You can write an article about it.